Hello and welcome back to Lady Disdain Reads. My name is Beatrice and today we will be looking at one of the shorter works from Jane Austen's Juvenilia, Lady Susan, which was written, we think, around 1794 to 1795, when Austen herself would have been around 20 years old. For those of you who don't know, Lady Susan is a short epistolary novel, meaning that it is written in the form of letters exchanged between the main characters. Austen was never to return to the epistolary genre for any of her full-length novels, although she did begin Sense and Sensibility as an epistolary novel. Lady Susan is not only unusual in this respect of being written in a different form, belonging to a different genre than her other novels, but also because it famously depicts a character who can only really be described as an anti-heroine, Lady Susan herself. Many readers enjoy Lady Susan for its irreverence and for the central role of a character who is so morally reprehensible, which is unusual for Austen. However, I personally find Lady Susan interesting for its representation of the morally corruptive consequences of scandal. Now, I have linked below a few videos that I find very helpful, a few video reviews rather that I find very helpful by very insightful Austen readers here on YouTube. So do check those out. And without further ado, let's get straight into the discussion and let me explain what I mean by scandal and why I think it's such a central theme in Lady Susan. So let's start with the concept of scandal itself. We tend to think of scandal as referring to the sense of moral outrage that occurs when a prominent figure in society commits a morally unacceptable act. However, that is actually not the original meaning of the word. Stemming from the Greek word skandalon, literally a trap. In medieval theology, for example in the works of Thomas Aquinas, scandal was thought of as a sin, specifically the sin or action that led other people astray. So metaphorically speaking, an action that led people into a moral trap. So it was not so much about shock value per se. If we think that something is shocking, we recognize that it's morally reprehensible, and we might be more likely to avoid that behavior, in fact. On the other hand, to give or to cause scandal, in the medieval sense of the term, meant to act in such a way that might actually persuade people to consequently also act immorally. If you're still confused about this, and it is a confusing and interesting topic because of course the meaning has changed so much over the centuries, then let me use Austen's Lady Susan as a concrete example of what I mean. Let's begin with this premise. Let's begin with the idea that Lady Susan's manipulative social intelligence, her linguistic intelligence, means that she never truly finds herself in what we would now call a scandal. Sure, she commits actions that are immoral and that are regarded as scandalous by some of the characters in the novel and by society at large, but she always manages to escape total social censure. She does incur in the disapproval of, for example, more perceptive characters like Mrs. Vernon in the novel. But she is never truly shunned by society, and she is never truly publicly disgraced. Thanks to what both she and Catherine Vernon call her command of language, Lady Susan is able to cause harm to others without ever ostensibly committing immoral actions. She does commit them, but there's never any proof, and she's never publicly shamed for this. This means that she's never actually ostracized from society, and that's a very important point to remember, because of course when we tend to think of scandalous people in society, they often end up being ostracized from society. So let me give you some examples of how her command of language helps her to retain her social status, regardless of what people might privately think of her. Firstly, she slyly uses the language of virtue in her letters to portray herself as someone who is highly aware of what it means to be a good person. In her first letter to Mr. Vernon, in which she invites herself over to stay at his family home, she cites the virtue of fortitude, one of the 4 cardinal virtues or classical virtues, as being necessary in her decision to separate herself from her daughter to send her to school so that she can have a better education. Obviously, we know that she doesn't actually care about her daughter's education as much as she would like people to think that she does, and in fact we also know that she's not going to miss her daughter, but that's not how she's portraying herself. She also claims something else. She also claims that her late husband's illness prevented her from giving her daughter the attention which both duty and affection should dictate. Furthermore, in a letter to Catherine Vernon later on in the novel, actually in a letter by Catherine Vernon to her mother, I believe, Mrs. Vernon reports Lady Susan as saying that taking care of her daughter Frederica is her first earthly duty. And in letter 30, Lady Susan herself attempts to convince Reginald that they should delay any thoughts of marriage until their families look more favourably on the match, citing the strongest conviction of duty as her main reason for doing so, for wanting to delay their nuptials. In all of these instances, what Lady Susan is doing is that she is using the word duty by again trying to portray herself as highly aware of her ethical obligations. So this was my first point. Secondly, let's have a look at the virtues that Lady Susan has and doesn't have. So, for all her machinations and her lack of theological virtues, such as the virtue of charity, Lady Susan does possess all the social virtues which ensure that she can retain her sense of propriety. In particular, she attempts to portray herself as reasonable by rebuking in others the kind of emotional excesses that we most commonly associate with Marianne Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility, and which indeed Marianne has to learn to let go of in order to become a kind of fully grown moral being. So let me give you a couple of examples of Lady Susan criticising emotional excesses in others. In letter 2, she complains to her close friend Mrs. Johnson that her daughter Frederica has set herself violently against a match with Sir James Martin. And that adverb there, violently, is very important because that's exactly the kind of word that's used in Sense and Sensibility all the time by Austen to describe Marianne's affections. Furthermore, in letter 39, Lady Susan again refers to the violence of Frederica's feelings. And in letter 22, when recounting an argument with Reginald de Courcy, she prides herself on her calm demeanour, while saying that he gave way to the most violent indignation. While she mentions Lady Susan's artifice and artful coquetry, Catherine Vernon herself has to admit in a letter to her mother that she has not detected the smallest impropriety in Lady Susan's behaviour. Nothing of vanity, of pretension, of levity. Lady Susan has thus successfully manipulated the language of sensibility to further the cause of her own reputation, forcing even Mrs. Vernon, even the wise Mrs. Vernon, the character who's arguably the most discerning character in the novel, to momentarily doubt her own opinion of Lady Susan. So in spite of gossip, Lady Susan manages to retain a good enough reputation that both the Vernons and the de Courcys still feel obliged to host her, or at least to acknowledge her as a relation. And she even makes an advantageous marriage to Sir James Martin at the end of the novel. We can therefore see that scandal in the modern sense of the word does not permanently damage Lady Susan, and definitely does not ostracize her from society. I find it interesting that it should be Reginald de Courcy himself who to use the word scandal in the more modern sense of causing outrage and gossip, since he is actually the character most damaged by Lady Susan's habit of giving scandal in the original, more medieval sense of the word. Let me explain what I mean by this. In a letter to his father, Reginald confesses, "I blame myself severely for having so easily believed the scandalous tales invented to the prejudice of Lady Susan." By this point, we must remember Lady Susan's charm has clearly had its effect on Reginald. Reginald here refers to scandal in terms of malevolent gossip circulating about Lady Susan, and even feels guilty for believing it. What he fails to realise, however, and this is the brilliancy of Austen's irony, is that Lady Susan has contributed to Reginald's own moral corruption by causing scandal. Scandal, in the proper sense of an action leading others astray, does not actually harm the person causing it, but those around that person. It festers and it spreads like a disease. For instance, Reginald is corrupted by Lady Susan's scandalous misrepresentation of her daughter Frederica, and he even comes to think of Frederica as dull and proud, despite the fact that he has no proof that she is either of those things. Not only this, but Lady Susan's behaviour acts as an obstacle or a stumbling block that causes Reginald's relationship with his family to become strained. And similarly, her scandalous behaviour also causes the marriage between the Mannerings to fall apart. In all these instances, scandal does not actually harm Lady Susan herself, but rather causes the spiritual downfall of those around her. So let me leave you for today with a reflection as well as with a question. I find it fascinating that in Lady Susan we can already see a young Austen concerning herself with issues of moral corruption, virtue, and the power of language to manipulate others. What then do we make of her decision to abandon the epistolary genre altogether? Some argue that by the time Jane Austen published Sense and Sensibility in 1811, her first published work, the epistolary genre had gone out of fashion, which is certainly true. But I also wonder if there is a deeper reason why she abandoned the genre, and if there is a deeper question for us to pose. Might it be that Austen quickly realised that the lack of an omniscient narrator made her readers more liable to stumble, and that it is harder for us to gauge the intentions and motivations of her characters when we lack the moral compass provided by a third-person narrator? There's definitely a lot more to be argued there, but this video has already become way too long, so perhaps that's a question for another day, and it's something I would definitely like to return to. So for today, let's stop here, and thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you did enjoy it, please consider giving it a like and a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. I have lots of exciting video plans for the next few weeks, so stay tuned for more content on Austen, but hopefully I would like to also branch out into discussing other authors, especially comparing other authors to Austen. For now, have a good week, and see you next time. Bye!